Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be doing an overview of my garage renovation that I did this past fall and winter. So one of the things I realized from my previous videos is that people love to know the process of things and how much things cost. So I figured I'd do an overview of this garage, what it looked like before, what it looks like now, what exactly I did, and roughly the cost on everything, and try and itemize it a little bit so that way people interested in doing something like this themselves have a better idea of what that process looks like and what they can plan to spend on something like this. So to start off with some context, this garage is roughly 1,050 square feet. It is 38 deep this way in length and 22 wide, so it's a standard width, but it is roughly a double deep garage. So as you've seen in previous videos, I can fit 4 cars in here no problem, even with the Tundra, which is an almost a 20-foot long truck. I can fit all those in here pretty easily. The Tundi makes it a little bit tougher, but overall it is a 4-car garage. I fit 4 cars in here every day. So those are the dimensions of this garage space. As you can see, there's a divider, not quite in the middle, but a little bit towards the back. That's the way it was when I bought it. I believe it's a code thing, but there is a garage door that comes up and down, which is kind of nice in the winter time if I want to just heat the back or do something like that. So it does have those bump outs on each side. A little bit annoying, but because they do interfere just a little bit. But I guess beggars can't be choosers. It is really nice to have this size garage. And then as you can see around the corner, we also have this bump out. So this bump out garage area here, or this shop area, whatever you prefer to call it, is about 14 by 14 foot square. So overall, if you do the math on all this, it's roughly 1,050 square feet. So that's just giving you the rough size of this garage. Obviously, if you have a 2 or a 3-car garage, costs are going to vary, but this gives you an idea of what it looks like to do a garage of this size. Now, first things first, when doing a project like this, is planning out the logistics of how to do everything. So obviously, when starting, I started doing things behind the walls first. So I'm going to put in some overlay of before pictures as we go here and before video and things, but before there was just bare OSB, installed backwards, water stained, really poorly done, at least on the walls in this front half. The ceiling itself was actually just open, so there was this lofty storage mezzanine here, but there was no paneling. It was just open to the 2x4 structure there. And same with the vaulted portions on the front and back. So the front and back is actually vaulted. So that was all open. I had access to what I needed to, and then I did remove all the OSB that was here previously. So I had access to all the electrical and the insulation. So first things first, I had to fix some of the electrical, move a few outlets, add a few outlets, things like that, and repair some insulation as well that was kind of water damaged and or just ripped and torn and in poor shape. So that was where I started with this project on the front side. In the back, I did the exact same thing. I removed most of that paneling that was back there because it was done poorly. So I could fix some of the electrical as well, and then replace the paneling because, like I said, poorly done, as well as the ceiling up there was open too. So both ceilings were open with no paneling, so that was a fresh slate. So as far as cost goes regarding that miscellaneous electrical work that needed to be done, like I said, just adding outlets, rerouting a few things, switching some breakers, nothing crazy, but just kind of getting things in order so there wasn't too much of a load on one circuit or another, as well as they had removed some outlets, but there was wiring in the wall. Just funky things that were done that needed correcting. So nothing major. I spent about $100 on miscellaneous outlets, connectors, things like that. So nothing crazy, but roughly $100 for electrical. Obviously, if you're starting fresh, you're gonna spend more because you're gonna be buying a whole spool of cable, which is, as we know, pretty darn expensive now. So that's obviously a variable cost, but that's what it cost me to get the electrical in here, at least the way I wanted it, or as good as I could get it with what I had. After doing the electrical and repairing some of the insulation that was there, I'm not adding the insulation costs because I had extra bats from previous projects, but after doing those two things, I had to add a bunch of blocking because, like I mentioned, there was no ceilings in either of these two portions of the garage. So adding just 2x4 blocking to add supports. So up here, I had to do 24 on center for all the plywood. At least on this flat portion, as you can see, and then on this vaulted portion here as well, both front and back. So purchasing 2x4s for that, and same with the back end, adding any blocking necessary to make sure we were 24 on center for all of our OSB here. So accounting for the blocking material, we're looking at about $100 of wood right there. Nothing too major as far as a 2x4 blocking cost, but still needed to be done. So I'm gonna add that in there for our total cost. One of the larger costs, at least regarding the structure or the walls and the ceiling, I should say, was the OSB. So I chose to go with OSB over drywall. Now, there's a couple reasons for that. I will agree drywall looks better. It's definitely, a little nicer, more premium look, but I like the idea of OSB just for its durability. I kind of bang on these here and there. I'm not that careful. It's a garage, not a showroom, so I do still use it, but I don't do anything crazy, but I just like the idea of it being a little bit more rugged. As well as hanging things is a lot easier. You can screw something in anywhere, and also you can see your studs everywhere as well. So that's the main reasons I went with OSB. You can still see the grain, obviously, if you look, especially when you get, the closer you get, the more of the fibers, or the strands, I should say, oriented strand board that you can see. But that's why I went with OSB. So OSB on all of the walls, the ceiling, both in the front, and both in the back and the front, as well as the lofted portions. So I used about 60 sheets of OSB for this entire garage, which came out to about $650 worth of OSB. Those prices went up and down as I was doing this project, between $8 a sheet to $15 a sheet. So that cost is pretty variable. I did use 7/16 sheets of OSB in most places. The back already had 1/2 inch used, so I did have to match the 1/2 inch on certain walls, but where I was doing fresh work, I was doing 7/16. So all of the ceilings are 7/16. The whole front half of this garage is 7/16. The only thing that is 1/2 inch OSB would be these back walls. So that gives you an idea. The cost difference between the two isn't too much different, but just pointing that out, 7/16 is pretty much the standard for doing something like this. So after the OSB was installed, it was time to install all of the trim. So this trim around the whole top border of this entire garage needed to be done because there was still some kind of shoddy cutsmanship, but also to route some wires after the fact. So all the speakers in here, I have 4 speakers in this back half and then 2 speakers in the front half. They're all speaker wires routed along this top edge, and it's all hidden by this trim. So this trim is just 1x4 pine, just cheapo pine. I sorted through it pretty good to get some good sheets, but I didn't want to spend money on actual trim. An 8-foot piece of this, I think, was like $2, but I'm gonna put the links to everything in here. But after all that speaker wire was installed, which again, I had extra speaker wire laying around, so I'm not gonna throw in that cost, but you're looking at a few bucks for speaker wire. I had to cover it all up with trim, and it also kind of just looks nice. Makes it look a little more finished and premium. So like I said, that's 1x4 pine, and then in other places where I had to add in some trim after the fact, it's 1x3 pine where it just made sense. So I actually did hardwire in a HDMI behind here all the way over to my receiver, but the TV I have doesn't actually utilize HDMI for audio output. So I had to actually throw in a cord after the fact, which goes obviously under here. Now this is a 1x3 piece of pine. That's the same as this 1x4 is, just a 1x3. So looking at all that trim, it was really only around $100 in trim, nothing major. I did a combination of just screws and brad nails to hold that up. Some pieces were warped. I did have to make them work, but yeah, not a big cost. So it does make it look nice. Oh yeah, and I also had to use some 1x2s up here on the vaulted part of the ceiling because the centered board is actually part of the support. This is actually a 2x4 or a 2x6. No, it's a 2x4. Part of the structure of the roof. So I did have to do some angled cuts on the OSB. And then to cover the gaps, I threw in some of these 1x2 pines as well, as you can see. Did that in all of the vaulted sections, just makes it look a bit nicer. Yeah, and then as you can see, when you get over up here, I didn't finish up here because I don't have access, but you can't see it unless you put a camera up there, so that's good. But like I said, about $100 for the trim. And then once all of the trim was done and all the OSB is in, I caulked every single seam on all of these OSB joints, as well as all of the edges on the trim, because if you don't caulk joints on OSB, you'll be able to see the gaps and it looks terrible when it's painted. So before you paint any OSB, always make sure you caulk every single seam. You can see the seam is pretty well hidden. I probably have a spot in here where I missed, and I'll show you the difference. See, there's a spot that's not caulked, so I gotta fix that. But imagine that, but along the entire board of the wall. So always, always, always caulk seams. Just looks a lot nicer. All right, let's talk paint. So one of the biggest pain in the butts doing this garage was painting. So obviously it's a lot of area to cover. Luckily I have a buddy who has a sprayer, so I did borrow that. It makes the job a ton easier. If you can get access to a sprayer, buy one, rent one, borrow one, do it. Rolling this would have taken a lot longer. I believe I spent 2 days doing this, so this is only 2 coats actually. I could have done a third, but I chose not to. After you'll hear how much I spent on paint. What I did was one base coat of an oil-based primer. You definitely want to use an oil-based primer on OSB. If it's water-based, it will suck it up even more, and it can cause some flaking on the strands in the board and cause them to lift away just from the moisture. So I use an oil-based primer. It took 10 gallons of oil-based primer to do just this space. Now, I was shocked at the amount of primer that took. I was expecting to use 5. So use 10 gallons. Took an afternoon to spray this thing down. And then for the second coat, I just did a standard white latex, I believe it's an eggshell coat layer of paint. And that was another 10 gallons. So after using 20 gallons of paint, 10 of each, the cost was right around $550. I was expecting to spend half that, honestly. I wasn't really sure what I was gonna spend on paint, and yeah, I was shocked. So after doing the 2 coats and spending almost $600 on paint, I said it looks good enough for me, and I left it. Now, it actually does look really good. I'm not just saying that. The only reason I say it looks good enough for me is because there are a few spots where there's a few streaks you can see if you really look for it, but 90% of the garage looks perfect. There's just a few spots that you really have to search for, and only really I know where they are. I'm not gonna show you because, yeah, they're my little secret, but you could have done 3, and if I was doing this, in a smaller space, I would do 3 coats just to be safe, because this OSB does suck it up pretty good. Now I will say that my coats were probably thicker than they should have been, so I may have used more paint than what would have been necessary, and I potentially could have got a 3rd coat if I went a little lighter, but I was still dialing it in. I had never used a sprayer like that before, so it was a learning experience. Overall, it turned out good, but that's the way I handled it and how much it cost. Okay, so let's talk flooring. Now, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but the back half of this garage was an addition. So it was a fresh slab with a fresh structure added to the existing original garage. Now that was done by the previous owner of this home. So the concrete in the back of the garage was perfect. It's fresher, and I never really saw the elements because no one really parked a car back there in the winter time. Now in Minnesota, we get tons of salt on our cars, which breaks down these slabs pretty good, as well as the freezing cycles and things like that. So this front half was the original slab, and it was pretty bad, pretty pitted, as you can see in some of the stuff I'm overlaying, but I did have to fix that before I was gonna do any sort of flooring. Now, I did look at epoxy options, but I would have really had to make this existing concrete slab pretty pristine. Probably would have had to hire somebody out to either tear it out, re-pour it, or come in and do some sort of a refinishing process, which would have been pretty darn expensive. So I went the alternate route, and I decided to go with the garage tile. Now, the garage tile is more forgiving, so I was able to just patch this myself, and it doesn't have to be perfectly smooth or look nice. It just has to be relatively smooth. It doesn't have to look nice because it's covered up, obviously. So what I had to do was fix the pitting in the garage, and how I did that was used a product called Recap. I believe it's by Quikrete. Now I used 6 bags of that, patch as necessary and level as best as I could. Now, that is a product I would definitely not recommend. It was super hard to work with, super finicky, and it took some time to really figure out how to get that laid down. I wasn't thrilled with the end result, but it was relatively smooth. I did go back and use my angle grinder and have to kind of fix a few areas and level it out even better. But yeah, that's what I did. I wouldn't recommend it. I don't have a good product recommendation for fixing or patching or leveling your garage, so that would require some research. But I don't recommend using recap. So that's what I used. I did have to patch this prior to doing any flooring. So using those 6 bags of recap to patch this front half of this garage cost me a little over 200 bucks to do that. Again, everything I did was more expensive than I originally thought it was going to be, but it's okay because it looks awesome and I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out. So after that was patched, I was able to actually lay down this floor. Now, before laying down any floor, any tile floor, I do recommend putting down landscape fabric. These floors, as you can hear, they like to click on the ground. Now, you probably heard that and you're like, what click? It sounds like your shoes. Yeah, they don't really click anymore, and the reason for that is the landscape fabric. Now, I did test a few tiles out on just bare concrete and then compared it with landscape fabric, and I wish I recorded it, but I didn't. There's some videos out there, so just look it up. But it makes a pretty big difference. So I did buy landscape fabric, and I covered my entire floor in just a single layer of landscape fabric, just cheapo, economy crap from Menards, and it worked just fine. So I highly recommend that to dampen some of the noise, because these do make a lot of noise when you walk in them if you do zero prep. So for this tile that I actually ended up choosing, I went with a tile called Motor Deck. You can buy it on Amazon, or I actually bought mine from Home Depot. It's not a name brand like Garage Deck or Swiss Tracks, but it is made in the same factory by the same manufacturer as those products. So I did a ton of research. Some of those tiles from the big companies are almost $5 a square foot. This was closer to $220 a square foot, $220 to $270 depending on the time and the color that you purchase. So I went with this. I did a ton of research. This is actually a really nice product. I'm pretty happy with it. It is relatively thick. The only thing that you can't really do on it is jack up a car. The jack will leave tiny dents. Now I think that's the same as all tile floors, that from what I've seen. So I just throw a piece of plywood under my jack, and it's not a big deal. So that's the only thing to think about when you're doing one of these floors. So 1,050 square feet of garage space with all this tile was roughly 2,800 bucks. So definitely the most expensive part of the garage. Definitely probably close to the same price as hiring somebody to throw an epoxy on. But like I said, my concrete was so rough that it was gonna be much more expensive to prep and do the epoxy. Plus, this is probably a house that I'm not gonna live in forever, so I can always pick this floor up and bring it with me wherever I go next. So that was also kind of a turn on to the idea of doing the garage tile versus an epoxy. So when installing this garage tile, it's a floating floor, so you're instructed to leave about a 1/2 inch gap. Maybe it's a 3/8, some sort of a gap around the edge of the entire floor, so it has room to expand and contract in the sun or when it gets hot or cold or whatever, typical for any floating floor. So I did trim out the entire bottom to cover that up. Now what this is rope, I'll throw it on the screen. Just a coil, 120 foot coil of their 4-inch rubber trim, and that's all it took to do this garage. Kind of a pain to install, especially in the corners, but you just use the adhesive that you can find at Menards or Home Depot for these rubber baseboards, and it goes pretty quick. It also ties the look together a lot. So just a single coil of the rope trim for the entire garage was right around 90 bucks plus 30 bucks worth of adhesive. So about 120 bucks to do the base trim. So one of the hardest things to determine when planning this project and purchasing things was, how much light do I need? And the answer is all of it. All of the light is what I wanted. So what I went with was these 10,000 lumen 6500K LED light strips. They're 8-foot strips, and each one is 10,000 lumens, and they come in a pack of 10, I believe. I have 2 packs of 10, so I have 20 of these times 10,000 lumens, 200,000 lumens at 6500K is what I have in this garage. So I have 10 in the front, 10 in the back. So as you can see, we've got the 2 right on each side. So when this garage door is up, those still reach the floor and actually provide light. I didn't put any up here because I rarely have this garage door closed when I'm in here, or am I rarely working back here. But it's still very bright, so didn't need them. We also have our strips along the entire ceiling here. So 6 on this ceiling right here, plus 2 above the garage door right here. We also have 2 mounted on the garage door. An entire strip of 4 along the back. And then the entire strip of 4 along the front. Now the 4 goes behind the garage door, hence why I put 2 on the garage door to make up for the ones that are covered. I can just unplug the corner right there and drop this garage door, and the lights will just not be on. They'll be, down vertically, and then the ones that are covered by the garage door will become exposed. So it all works out. I thought that worked pretty good. Don't let me toot my own horn, but I thought that was a good idea, and it makes it a lot brighter here. Otherwise, this garage door was covered by the light, or was covering the light, and it made it a lot darker back here. But as you can see, it is plenty bright for detailing, which is most of what I do when I'm mostly doing it in the front half of the garage, where the most light is anyway. So overall, pretty evenly distributed for the way I had to work here. So that's 20 of those 8-foot, 10,000 lumen, 6500K lights. I also put in 6 of these smaller 4-foot lights right above my workbench. It gives me a nice shadow-free area to work, and it brightens it up. It wasn't necessarily a dead corner, but just a place where I like to actually sit and do some things, so adds a little bit more light and focus to that area as well. Now I did take one of those 4-foot lights and hook it up to my garage door. As you can see, my garage door is hidden by the ceiling. Actually, I took 2, sorry. It's hidden by the ceiling, so there is no light. So those 2 are plugged directly into my garage door, and when I open the garage door, those kick on just as my auxiliary lighting, so I can see at night or whatever, so it's not pitch black. But they're generally off. So all of that lighting cost around 600 bucks. I think those are a really good deal for those lights. They're pretty cheap, cheaper than anything else. They're pretty decent quality, really easy to mount, and they're linkable, really easy to work with, so I would recommend them. Sounds like a lot for lighting, but I think it's actually pretty cheap. A lot of these nicer name brand or hex lights and things like that are in the hundreds of dollars for just, a smaller section. So I think this was a pretty good bang for your buck, and this place is lit up. So I like it, and I would definitely recommend it. So I actually did hardwire these lights in. They can be plugged in, but I went with the hardwire. I think it looks cleaner. So I just took blank covers, drilled holes in them, and then ran the wire right through like that. Looks a lot cleaner, and I did that everywhere, and then they just link right in the middle. As you can see, I just spaced them so I had more equal light distribution. Otherwise, they can just connect with their connector directly. So worked out pretty good. And then you can buy extenders for these as well, which I had to do to get power over here. But I did plan out all of this power, so like I mentioned, I ran this power here intentionally for each light strip. Same with the back half of the garage. So all in all, it did take some decent planning to make sure that I had the power where I needed it and the amount of power I needed to run certain things in certain locations, but I did plan for all of that with these lights, as well as compressor and things like that. So yeah, that was a big part of the planning process, as well as drawing diagrams for the flooring and all that stuff. So I also added a plumbed section here for my hose reel and my compressor. So I actually bought a new compressor. Previously I had a 60-gallon Ingersoll Rand industrial 2-phase 220 whatever compressor. It was huge. It took a long time to actually generate significant pressure, and I just didn't need it. It was also extremely loud. So I got this Master Force 20-gallon quiet, ultra quiet compressor, which I freaking love. I don't need anything crazy. I really don't use this for blowing off cars, filling tires, stuff like that. I don't really run any air tools. Just a nice little unit right there. And then I hard plumbed that in using black iron. So I just have my flex pipe, my drain nipple, black iron shut off valve, and then just running to my water separator directly into my hose reel. So this hose reel is also very nice. It's very heavy duty, solid metal. This thing weighs like 30, 40 pounds. It was pretty hard to put up, but it's really nice to have. Highly recommend it. Both this compressor and this hose reel are pretty high quality for being Masterforce, so I'm pretty happy with them. That's why I bought them, otherwise I would have gone with a different brand. They weren't even that cheap. So highly recommend, but I also added those in, so just more convenient for doing things. So yeah, just thought I'd point that out. Also, obviously you can see I have a TV here. This is just a 42-inch TV. It's an old TV I had laying around. Nothing special, but I have it hooked up to Wi-Fi with a Roku so I can watch, Formula One or movies or whatever out here as I'm detailing cars. So that's why I added that in. It's a game changer. So it is actually, like I mentioned, wired in so it can go into my receiver here. Now I can run aux or I can run directly onto the TV. So this is just an old, nothing special stereo receiver that came with this house. Kind of funny how it works. Actually, it kind of bangs. Plus I have a sub down here, as you can see, and then the 4 satellites out here plus 2 in the front. So sound system in here actually cooks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. Sometimes I have to turn it down because my girlfriend can hear me inside the house. But yeah, so it's hooked up to the TV, which I really can't believe I didn't have before. Just makes things, it's just nice background noise. So makes working on things a little bit nicer. Plus when I'm looking up YouTube tutorials, when I'm screwing around and I don't know what the heck I'm doing with my cars, it's right there. Other than that, there's not a whole lot to see. So most of the stuff I had before, I've got all storage shelves over here, some flags just to make sure it's not so bland. American flag, Porsche flag, Milwaukee flag. We're Team Milwaukee, not Team DeWalt, not Team Ryobi, Team Milwaukee. I have the Wolfsburg flag for the Golf. I think that's pretty sick. I've actually been there and it's awesome. So highly recommend that. And then I just have the Red Bull flag that I haven't permanently hung. I'm just kind of getting creases out of it. So those are my decorations. Not a very decorative guy. But yeah. So there are still a few things I have to take care of to tidy up this garage. Still trying to figure out how I want to have my tool set up over there. I need to fix this garage door. As you can tell, it's kind of yellow now that the whole thing is white. So I'm going to paint the insulation there as well. I forgot to touch on, I do have heaters in the front and the back, but those were already here. I just moved them. So no cost there to me. If you're going to add in heaters, you're looking at 150 to 500 per heater, depending on what you're going with. These are just 220 electric heaters. So like I said, depends on what you go with, whether it's electric or gas and how much heat you want, but that's what I have. Overall, the amount I spent on this garage for myself was just under $6,000 to make it the way you see it today. Obviously, like I said, tools, boxes, shelves I already had here before, so I'm not including that stuff, just the actual construction, materials, everything to get the garage the way it is. My memory card ran out of memory, so like I was saying, just a bit under $6,000 to finish off this garage. Now, like I mentioned, that this garage is already insulated, so that wasn't a cost that I had to absorb. Now, that doesn't cost a whole lot of money, but it is another thing that someone might have to do. The majority of electrical work was done, so I only had to do minor stuff here and there, so that wasn't a major cost as well. So just other things to think about if you are looking to remodel your garage. Also, the other thing I didn't include, like I mentioned, is the furnishing. So I have my couple of US General toolboxes, some shelving, a couple other shelves. So if you add in some of those things, you're looking at another $1,000 to $1,500 for that. And then you got all the tools you got to buy. So you can really dive deep into the costs on stuff like this. But really, the main thing to think about is the structure, all of the tools, and this tool storage and workbenches and stuff. That's all sort of its own category. Now, a lot of guys do go ahead and do the full cabinet setups. I don't really have the room to do that the way mine is set up. I do like the idea of that, so if that becomes an option with how I end up arranging or changing things in here, I would consider that. But the way mine is set up, and with the fact that I need to park 4 cars in here, I don't really have room in the front of my garage to do that, which is where you generally would do that. So yeah, I'm kind of tangenting, but yeah. So I hope that this was helpful to understand the process of doing something like this, as well as the costs associated with something like this as well. I know I was pretty methodical when I planned this out, so I did have a decent idea of where I would be, but I know that sometimes it's not always what it seems. So yeah, that's all I got for today. I appreciate you for watching, hope I helped, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks.